Penny. Okay, Councillor Crum.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of questions on the DFA portfolio as well. And there is an amendment that I'm tabling, just essentially like you, Deputy Mayor, just seeking some bigger context for understanding where we're going with the whole debt headroom issue, especially since what we're facing now today in terms of been asking to vote to draw down up to 200 mil seems, it's a bit harsh to say out of context, but has come on quite quickly. That's definitely the feeling that I have in any sense. So just a question for, and because it's mentioned that it is following the review of alternative sources of financing, that we've got this topic going here, in bringing the recommendation into the Mayor's proposal to draw down up to 200 mil, did we take into account in the Ernst Young report their, you probably can't call it recommendations, but it's option 2AI on page 42 of the Ernst Young report, where it says that if we decide to modify our stake in the DFA portfolio, then it lists 4 things that we should be doing if we decide. Were those all taken into consideration in bringing this recommendation?
No.
No. So, I mean, maybe we can say this delay, but wouldn't it be prudent if we had undertaken all those considerations, and perhaps we should be looking at making this particular decision subject to...
So I'm sure the staff, I mean, we have been talking about bringing this to finance and performance before it came up in the Mayor's budget. So,
can I respond? So through the Chair, and I can't quite remember 2BII, but rest assured we have been well across those reports, and if I recall the thrust of their advice, I would wrap it all up basically in just good practice in the sense of how one goes about realising share market equity assets through the market. So issues of appropriate staging, not thinking about doing it all at once, market conditions and the like. And look, I would suggest to you we have some extremely well-qualified professional people within our Treasury. We have an extremely well-experienced professional CFO. I guess for the team, we regard this as pretty stock and trade, and there was nothing in EY's advice that wouldn't be abundantly clear to us in any process of exiting those funds that we would consider. Could I add as well, there is at a management level, we operate a Treasury Management Steering Group. We have attendance from Richard Morris at AT, an experienced professional is on that as well. We also have John Duncan, who's probably a kind of a multi-decade experienced banker in the New Zealand and Australasian markets. We have input from Stu Henderson, who's been deep in Treasury and investment markets, again for 2 or 3 decades. So, we would suggest things are in fairly safe hands, and there's nothing that... And there's nothing that EY raised there that wouldn't just be implicit in our considerations.
No, I'll save further comments for later, Madam Chair, but just a final comment for me would just be it's in the context of a rigorous analysis of all the other options for sales or realising alternative financing that rigorous now should also be rigorous later. So it's not at all debating staff competency, not for a second, but just trying to understand where we've got to in terms of having this come across our table for what feels like a binary decision today without the context of all the other things that Ernst Young and Cameron and Partners have raised.
So, Matthew, my understanding is that this is one we can do without going out to consult again. Because, I mean, if we go out, we decide... Lisa, I'm trying to be sensible.
I'm just sorry. It's just...
Well,
sure
maybe
give you one
more chance, Madam Chair. I'll give you one more chance, and then I might have to ask you to leave, all right? Matthew, this is one that we don't have to because it's a It's not like a building that we would then have to go out as it's an asset of the council.
Correct. So in the context of this year's budget, you know, I guess if you ranked in priority order and your ranking was around ease of implementation, then the DFA portfolio was always well at the top of the list. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lee.
Yes, just before I ask a question, I just want to point out in the officer's report on the diversified financial assets portfolio, in point 1 background, it suggests that the DFAP was established by the Auckland Regional Council. That is not correct. It was established by another regional agency called Infrastructure Auckland. And yes, the bulk of the money that has been invested has been from the asset sales of regional assets, but also port profits, sale of harbour board land, and so on. Can I also point out two things happened during that earlier round of asset sales in the 90s. One, a very strong public backlash, and two, around that time, the sudden realisation that Auckland had an enormous infrastructure deficit on just about everything, and therefore that money was turned into essentially an infrastructure fund, Auckland's infrastructure fund. You can call it what you like, rainy day fund or whatever, but that money was used, for instance, to help build Britomart rail station, and former Mayor of Auckland City will recall that, and it was used by the ARC to rebuild Auckland's rail network. So I'll just make that point. It's meant to be drawn down because at times it's earned 18%. It doesn't have to be drawn down, it could be reinvested actually, and call it whatever you like, but it is an alternative form of funding. It's an alternative funding stream, bigger and less problematic, Mr Mayor, than any motorway charge. It earns more money than any motorway charge. I'll just make that point. Now my question is, what I haven't seen is the total cost of this year's annual plan. I read somewhere it was 3.1 billion, but could I have the actual figure that what we're talking about today?
So, Madam Chair, page 216, which is the back page of the mayoral proposals, got a nice wee summary on total capex, total opex.
Well, I've seen the capex.
So around 3.7 billion in operating and 1.9 in capital.
So
this is the whole for councillors. Councillor Mike, the challenge that we've had, and I've given this direction really from the get-go, we started off by splitting the council group away from the CCOs. That is the entire budget, including CCOs. So it was always around 5 bill, and you know, we have got caught up between what is the Auckland Council group and what are the CCOs, Mike. So there's the total budget.
So we're talking about 5.6.
Yep, absolutely.
It's not a figure you see much of, really, is it? Given the things people were consulted on. So 5.6 billion is what we're talking about. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Quacks.
That figure doesn't appear anywhere, does it?
Councillor Quacks.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I just want to thank Councillor Holson and Councillor Crum for asking questions around the diversified financial portfolio. So I really don't have any more questions. The questions have all been answered, but Councillor Cooper mentioned that they were shares. It's more than just shares that we have in that portfolio. It includes things like currency hedging, I understand, which is quite risky. Is that right, Matthew?
Yes, it does.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Clow.
My comments were going to be on the same issue, and I have some amendments here as well. I'm not anti us using this, though I'm pretty cautious about us rushing in to use this. But my amendments coming later, depending on what Councillor Crumb's amendments is, I find a little bit unusual that we're authorising just the group financial officer. I would have thought the CEO should be included, plus the chair of the Finance and Performance Committee, so that there are 3 heads going into it, and there's nothing against the CFO at all. She's an incredibly capable person, so it's not an issue, but it's just a little bit more comfort, including one political person from the political arm, I think, should be there. Yep. And the chief executive should be overseeing. So I'd propose that they go in there, and then I would just have later the words be authorised to draw down if required, because there's a bit of an insinuation it's going to happen. Yep. And it should be if required. And the reason I'm saying that is because pretty well I thought we had agreement around this table that following the 2 reports that came in, it's Young and Cameron, was that really the big ticket items such as, you know, any non-service buildings or the ASB Tower, film studios, airport shares, what we do with the port are really going to be left for the next council and the next LTP, because these are hot political potatoes that really should be consulted on, a lot of thought. So I'd like to add those changes with a few more people plus the words if required, in order to make sure, because the bottom line is by not rushing in and using this money, that does force staff, CCOs to check and recheck projects and see where we can make savings and conserve expenditure. So that's all I'm saying.
Okay. Thanks. Councillor Casey.
3 questions just based on what I've heard in the questions so far. The first is to the Mayor, just on his selective memory as well as his selective listening. He promised the people of Auckland a referendum on tolling. I want to ask him if he still thinks that the people of Auckland should have a say on the introduction of a motorway network charge. Do you want to answer that, and then I'll go to the next question?
Oh, look, again, slightly selective. I mean, I'm happy to look back over all the statements that I made, but I certainly committed to the fact that that was an option for us going forward. If I was a part of that discussion, then, and of course, it's just not Auckland Council. The government would have to agree to this. We're sort of quietly working away on them. If in the end the government thought that it was a good idea, it might well be that they also would be in support of a referendum. So that's part of our future discussion. I always felt that what we went through was pretty rigorous. Some people just didn't like the answer.
So was that a yes or a no?
Oh, for goodness.
Well, I've indicated that I was prepared, but I certainly made no, sort of total commitment that, hey, look, we're going to do a referendum.
So it's a maybe.
Yeah,
my second
maybe. That's fair
question
enough.
relates
I'll
to
accept that.
the ASB building and corporate accommodation, and I'll just make the same plea that we, as a council, had a committee meeting where we discussed corporate accommodation and 10 buildings where the staff have refused to tell us the names of the 9 buildings.
Councillor Casey,
It's
they're
true.
coming to the next finance.
I don't care. I have asked for it.
It is
in committee. I'm asking again today.
They are coming to the next finance and performance
We
meeting,
had
which is
a
next week.
committee discussion around a report talking about 10 buildings, of which only 1 was named. The reason for that is withholding because they don't trust the councillors not to leak it to the
Getting
Herald.
a list of it next
I don't
week.
care when it's coming, Penny. It's already about 10 days
But
overdue.
I'm just telling you it's coming. Okay, thank you. Another
Our
question?
last question. Yeah. We're talking about $80 million to Auckland Transport, and I've just heard from Councillor Lee that it may be the Auckland Transport Board has not approved us. Can I ask, through the chair of anybody, if this was a request from staff that went through the board of Auckland Transport? $80 million is a lot of money. I would expect it to have board sign-off.
I would accept that.
Look, I'll just need to go away and check that. I'm pretty certain it has actually been through the board, although I don't suspect it'll be a resolution in our board papers. I do think it was included in our budgetary material, but I will go away and check that.
Use your mobile.
Madam Chair, I can confirm as a board member this wasn't a specific resolution, but it was traversed by the board in full.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Can I just
Councillor
check that? You mean there's no formal resolution for a request of this council for $80 million?
300. 300
Madam Chair, I'm not in a position where I don't have resolutions in front of me.
Maybe, Richard, you could check and come back to me. I'd like to see something in writing, please.
Thank you, Councillor Casey. Thank you. Member Tamahiri.
Oh, yeah, Madam Chair, I'd just seek your indulgence to take a tad longer than anticipated. The reason being we get excluded when you break into the governing board come 1:30. And then
We'll be at the end of this meeting. It won't not be
well, yeah,
1:30.
okay. Well, you never know. Well, you never know
tonight.
because my mate over here has a strong inclination for exclusion. But putting that to one side. But putting that to one side, just to make a couple of observations of the contribution to the debate so far. And at the end of them, I would invite the Mayor to give us a response to them. Don't you find it remarkable, the amount of introspection that goes into the scrutiny on one small slither of this budget in terms of Māori freehold land? It makes up less than 1% of the total of land in this city. And it's the last remnants of what the Indigenous people have left. But all of a sudden, you'll start to see more ink focusing on that particular issue. And I would ask in this council and in the incoming regime that we start to be fairer in regard to the introspection. Because if you place the microscope as much on matters Māori to be supervised as you do, to the extent that you should in your stewardship of all the other money and items, I'm sure you'd be able to strip out a lot more money in regard to a conversation on where your rate strike may apply. I'm saying that on the basis of this. There's 55% of all Māori, and it's the largest Māori city in the world, let alone the country. It is the largest Polynesian city. 55% of residents here, Māori, have rentals. 60% of Polynesians. And it's the biggest Pacific Island city in the world. So any rate strike flows immediately, whatever decision is made here, whether it's the nimbleness of a UAGC or whether it's a rate strike, it also disaffects, as you rightly know, fixed income peoples or wage and salary peoples. They can't pass this on. If you're talking about tolls, Mayor, tolls are passed on by the rich to the poor. And so unless you have a wired-up public transport system, and I know you've done some great work in that regard, we've got some issues here. And so the last point I would make is that by iterative decisions around this table, you've actually backed yourself into a cul-de-sac. You're going to have to vote for a rate increase. And the reason is all your pet projects that you ticked off have to be paid for. Okay? Now, I won't get into the individuality of those. You know what? The natives are at the back of the bus just watching it. We're not steering this thing. So I'm just trying to alert you to a number of unfair processes that are here. When Councillor Fletcher, Darby, Clow, and one of the best readers of a budget and a balance sheet around here is Councillor Cashmore, raised prudent and prudential issues around the way in which iteratively you were steered into a decision by your officials, leads to this issue. The only advice that I've seen that's been outstanding is when you've got third parties involved, okay, to ride shotgun on the IT project, EY. If you have a look at the investment approach, if you didn't get independent advice from Camerons and EY, we would be a lot worse off for the wear, and that's the point made by Councillor Crum. And so I'm endeavouring to ingratiate everybody in the conversation as we get excluded very shortly. Kia ora.
Thank you.